Today's video brings together two very different crimes. A case where violence unfolded quietly before erupting into a revenge killing, and the UK's biggest benefit fraud, stripping more than £53 million from the system through years of calculated deception. None of these cases exploded into public view straight away. What connects both of them is not the offence, but the way they were uncovered, through fragments of evidence, patient investigation, and moments that seemed insignificant at the time until everything was laid out in court. This is the story of fraud, exploitation, and extreme violence, and how each case was built, piece by piece, until there was nowhere left to hide. Welcome to UK Crime Documentaries. Let's get straight into the cases. Max Dixon and Mason Rist from Bristol, known to family and friends as ordinary young men with lives rooted in the city. On the night they died, they were moving through familiar streets, doing nothing unusual and carrying no sense of risk or threat. Neither man was involved in any ongoing dispute or had no connection, personal, social, or otherwise, to the group responsible for the attack, whereas the attackers came from Hartcliffe, a group made up of teenagers and adults who were connected through family, friendship, and regular association at a specific address in the area. At the centre of that group was Cody Shy Westcott, whose family home in Hartcliffe became the point from which the later violence was set in motion. Alongside him were Riley Tolliver and two other teenagers, all of whom would later be convicted for their direct roles in the killings, as well as Anthony Snook, an older associate who acted as the driver during the attack. Also connected to the group were Bailey Westcott and Jamie Ogborn. Neither of them took part in the fatal attack and would later play crucial roles in helping those responsible, but we will talk about them in a few minutes. The incident that triggered everything happened at a house in Hartcliffe, Bristol, an address already central to the lives of the people inside it. Late that evening, a brick was thrown through a window of the property. It was sudden, loud, and unmistakable. Whoever threw it did not enter the house or confront anyone directly. The act itself lasted seconds. The damage was immediate. Glass shattered inside the property, breaking the sense of security of those inside and turning what had been an enclosed space into the scene of an attack. The window damage was visible, and the noise made it clear this was not an accident. Inside the house were several people, including Cody Shy Westcott and others. No one inside saw who threw the brick. CCTV cameras later showed figures outside the property, but their faces were covered by masks and hooded clothing, making them unidentifiable. There was no clear visual confirmation of who was responsible. The brick was treated as a message, and within moments, attention shifted from the damage itself to who might be responsible. Phones came out almost immediately to make calls, and messages with information were sent. Once the idea of retaliation took hold, events moved quickly. Weapons were already present at the address. Knives and machetes that could be used to cause serious harm were accessible. What stands out is how little time passed between feeling provoked and preparing to act. The shift from anger to action was almost seamless. After leaving the house, the group travelled by car. Anthony Snook was driving. Inside the vehicle were Cody Shy Westcott, Riley Tolliver, and two other teenagers who were later convicted but cannot be named because of their age. The purpose of the journey was to locate the individuals they believed were responsible for the brick attack at the Hartcliffe address. The route taken moved out of Hartcliffe and into nearby residential streets in Bristol. There was no confirmed information identifying who had thrown the brick. The group relied on assumption rather than evidence, and driving through areas where they believed the suspects might be found. During the drive, Max Dixon and Mason Rist were seen walking along Ilminster Avenue, close to Mason Rist's home. The two boys had just left the house and were walking to a local takeaway to buy food. Despite this, they were mistakenly identified as targets, solely based on their presence in the area. The car stopped near Ilminster Avenue. The attackers exited the vehicle almost immediately. Cody Shy Westcott was armed with a large bladed weapon described in court as a machete or zombie-style knife. Other members of the group were also armed, including with a baseball bat and additional bladed weapons. The attack began as soon as the group reached Max Dixon and Mason Rist. CCTV footage shown to the jury captured the incident. From the first contact to the moment the attackers disengaged, the violence lasted approximately 33 seconds. Both Max Dixon and Mason Rist were stabbed repeatedly during the attack. Max Dixon suffered multiple knife wounds that caused him to collapse at the scene. Mason Rist was stabbed a short distance away, close to the entrance of his family home. The injuries sustained by both boys were described as unsurvivable. Within minutes of the attack ending and the car leaving the scene, emergency services were alerted, and the focus of events shifted from the street itself to the immediate response and the start of a major police investigation. Emergency services were called within minutes of the attack. Police officers and paramedics arrived to find both seriously injured on the street. Both were treated at the scene before being taken to separate hospitals. Despite medical intervention, both boys later died from their injuries. The area was immediately secured. Officers established cordons and began preserving the scene. Bloodstains, discarded items, and the position of the victims were documented. The location of the attack, a residential street, meant that potential witnesses were nearby. Early witness descriptions were limited. The attack had been brief, and those involved were reported to be wearing dark clothing with their faces not clearly visible. Witnesses were able to describe the arrival and departure of a vehicle, which became an early focus of the investigation. Police quickly identified the presence of CCTV cameras in the surrounding area, including residential systems and nearby street coverage. Footage showed the entire sequence of attack till attackers left the area almost immediately after the violence ended. Forensic teams examined the scene, collecting evidence including blood samples and reviewing the attack location in detail. The short duration of the incident made the timeline tight, but it also helped investigators narrow the window in which the suspect's movements occurred. At the same time, activity continued back at the Hartcliffe address. Those connected to the group were communicating with each other following the attack. Phones were in use and movements were being made away from the house. While police attention was initially centered on crime scene, events linked to the earlier brick attack were already becoming relevant as investigators began tracing where the suspects had come from and where they went next. As the immediate response phase ended, officers began linking the street attack to earlier events that night. In the hours after the attack, actions were taken to remove evidence linked to what had happened earlier that night. At the Hartcliffe address, a fire was lit in the back garden. Items were placed into the fire and burned, including clothing worn before and after the attack. The purpose was to destroy material that could later be forensically examined. At the same time, weapons connected to the group were dealt with. Bladed weapons were cleaned, concealed, or moved rather than left in open view. These items were not recovered immediately, and their handling later became a key focus of the investigation. Attention also turned to mobile phones. Devices that had been used around the time of the attack were disposed of or destroyed, limiting what could be recovered from call records, messages, or location data. These actions took place shortly after the killings, before arrests were made. The steps taken during this period were practical rather than complex. Each action reduced what could be directly linked back to the individuals involved. As these efforts were underway, police activity elsewhere was increasing. Those actions would soon shift attention back to the people connected to Hartcliffe, and to others who became involved after the killings, not through violence, but through what they did to help those responsible avoid detection. Apart from evidence removal, the investigation later established that help was provided to divert the investigation. Bailey Westcott's role focused on assisting with movement and logistics. Evidence showed that arrangements were made to move individuals connected to the killings away from areas where police activity was expected. Rather than using vehicles already linked to the group, taxis were used to reduce the risk of identification. Jamie Ogborn was involved in providing temporary accommodation at a flat, where some of those connected to the attack could stay in the immediate aftermath. This flat later became a point of interest for investigators as they began mapping movements following the killings. Money was supplied to support these arrangements. Cash was provided to cover transport and short-term needs. Burner phones were also given out, allowing communication to continue without using devices that they had already removed. One of the most significant actions involved guidance given to a teenage defendant about how to deal with police if questioned. Instructions were provided on what information should not be disclosed, particularly around movements and who had been present that night. While those actions were intended to shield the attackers, they instead expanded the case, drawing more people into the investigation and setting the stage for the arrests that followed. As news of the death spread across Bristol, the response was immediate. Ilminster Avenue became a focal point for grief. Flowers, cards, and handwritten messages were left near the scene, many referencing the boys' friendship and the fact they had grown up together, attending the same nursery, primary school, and secondary school. Tributes described Max and Mason as close friends who spent much of their time together, particularly gaming at home. The loss was felt not only by their families, but across the local community, where both boys were well known. What we have already discussed. Family members of both boys spoke publicly about their shock and devastation. They made clear that Max Dixon and Mason Rist had not been involved in any dispute and had simply left home to buy pizza when they were attacked. Their statements focused on the innocence of the boys and the irreversible impact of the killings. At the same time, the police investigation moved rapidly. Arrests were made as officers followed CCTV evidence, phone data, and witness accounts. Additional arrests followed for those suspected of helping after the killings. Those directly involved in the fatal attack were charged with murder. Separately, Bailey Westcott and Jamie Ogborn were charged with assisting an offender. Police recovered 8 weapons connected to the wider group. These included bladed weapons and other items. Not all could be conclusively linked to the attack itself, and some questions about their handling and movement were never fully answered. With arrests completed and charges laid, the focus of the case shifted from investigation to the courtroom. The case proceeded to trial at Bristol Crown Court, where the prosecution set out a detailed timeline of events along with the overwhelming evidence. The trial dealt separately with those accused of carrying out the murders and those accused of helping after the fact. At the conclusion of the trial, the jury returned guilty verdicts. Cody Shea Westcott, Riley Tolliver, Anthony Snook, and 2 other teenage defendants were all convicted of the murders. During sentencing, the judge described the killings as a deliberate revenge attack involving bladed weapons carried out against 2 boys who had done nothing wrong. The court highlighted the seriousness of the offense, the use of extreme violence, and the fact that the victims were targeted due to mistaken identity. All 5 defendants convicted of murder received life sentences. Cody Shea Westcott was given a minimum term of more than 23 years and ordered to be detained in a secure children's home until he becomes an adult. Anthony Snook received a life sentence with a minimum term reported at 38 years. Riley Tolliver and the 2 unnamed teenage defendants were also given life sentences, but their exact minimum terms were not fully detailed in public reporting. Bailey Westcott and Jamie Ogborn received custodial sentences. In both cases, the court applied sentence reductions to reflect their guilty pleas. The first case showed how mistaken identity and retaliation led to sudden, irreversible violence. The next case shifts to a different kind of crime, one built slowly, deliberately, and hidden behind legitimate trade. The fraud operation operated across 3 separate locations in London, each chosen for its ability to blend into everyday life. These were not hidden units or abandoned properties. They were ordinary premises in busy areas, deliberately selected so that nothing about them appeared out of place. The primary base was in Wood Green, which became the centre of activity. This location handled the bulk of the work and acted as the main coordination point for the wider scheme. Each site functioned as a front-facing, legitimate business. Doors were open during normal hours, staff worked openly, and members of the public could enter without restriction. Inside, however, the real activity was taking place behind the scenes. Computers, printers, and stacks of documents were used to produce benefit claims on an industrial scale. The operation followed a claim pack production model. We will cover this in a few minutes. A central part of the operation was Antonia Foods, a grocery shop used as both a cover and a workspace. On the surface, it functioned like any other local food shop, but in reality, it was used to organize paperwork, coordinate submissions, and manage people involved in the scheme. The shop allowed the operation to hide in plain sight. Each member of the group had a defined role, supported by evidence later examined in court. At the center of the fraud was Galina Nikolova, who investigators and the court identified as one of the principal architects of the scheme. Operating primarily from North London, Nikolova coordinated the creation and submission of thousands of false universal credit claims between 2016 and 2021. She oversaw the production of forged tenancy agreements, fake payslips, and fabricated letters, and processed claims on behalf of at least 2,400 individuals. Financial evidence showed she personally benefited by millions of pounds through commission payments and retained control over large sums of cash later found hidden in her home. Alongside her was Gayunesh Ali, described by the judge as having committed fraud on an industrial scale. Ali played a leading operational role, managing large volumes of claims and overseeing the laundering of proceeds through numerous bank accounts before cash withdrawals. He was directly linked to videos and images recovered during the investigation that showed cash being handled and flaunted. Stoyan Stoyanov acted as a key facilitator within the group. Closely associated with Nikolova, he assisted in processing claims, handling documentation, and moving money. Evidence showed that even after the group had come under investigation, Stoyanov continued making fraudulent claims, demonstrating his active and ongoing involvement rather than a peripheral role. Tsvetka Todorova was involved in the preparation and submission of false claims and in possessing articles used for fraud. Although she attempted to minimize her role after arrest, the evidence placed her firmly within the operational structure of the group. She also attempted, unsuccessfully, to leave the UK after the arrests, indicating awareness of the seriousness of the offences. The youngest member of the group was Patricia Panova. Recruited at the age of 19, Panova worked within the system set up by Nikolova and Ali, assisting with money laundering arrangements and handling fraudulent documentation. Financial records showed she received daily payments and later accumulated significant sums linked directly to the fraud, despite her relatively junior position. Nothing about the setup relied on secrecy in the traditional sense. It relied on normality. Ordinary shops, routine activity, and familiar streets provided the protection the group needed. But systems built on repetition always leave patterns, and it was those patterns that would eventually bring the operation into focus. The fraud ran continuously for a period of more than 4.5 years, and over that time, investigators established that around 6,000 separate universal credit claims were submitted. The claims were made using two parallel methods. Some applications relied on entirely fabricated identities, created solely for the purpose of claiming benefits. Others used real people, often Bulgarian nationals living outside the UK, who knowingly allowed their identities to be used in exchange for a share of the money. In both cases, once an identity entered the system, control of the claim passed fully to the group, not the named claimant. Each application was supported by a tailored set of forged documents. When a claim was rejected by the Department for Work and Pensions, it was not abandoned. Instead, the same claim was resubmitted repeatedly, with small adjustments made to tenancy details, employment information, or supporting letters until it was eventually approved. This cycle, submit, reject, modify, resubmit, was repeated as many times as necessary. As the volume increased, the system became routine. Claims were monitored daily, payments were tracked, and once money was released, it was quickly withdrawn or transferred through multiple accounts. Over time, This approach turned universal credit into what investigators later described as a predictable and reliable source of income, treated less like a welfare system and more like a cash machine. By the time the fraud was disrupted in 2021, the cumulative total had reached more than £53 million, making it the largest benefit fraud case ever prosecuted in England and Wales. But understanding the scale is only part of the picture. The next we will break down exactly how the money moved and how such vast sums were hidden in plain sight for years. At the heart of the operation was a system designed to manufacture credibility. Every false claim was supported by a carefully assembled bundle of documents that, when viewed together, created the appearance of an ordinary working life in the UK. Central to each pack were fake tenancy agreements used to establish a UK address and justify housing-related elements of universal credit. These documents listed landlords who did not exist or who could not be traced, and properties that were either unrelated to the claimant or entirely fictitious. When needed, the details were altered and resubmitted to overcome earlier rejections. Alongside the tenancy paperwork were counterfeit payslips designed to show low or unstable income rather than unemployment. This allowed claims to appear realistic and helped avoid scrutiny that might come with claiming maximum entitlement. The payslips followed standard UK formats, complete with employer names, payroll numbers, and payment schedules. The claims were further reinforced with forged letters. These included GP letters confirming medical issues, landlord letters verifying residency, employer references supporting employment histories, and in some cases, school or education-related letters. Each document was produced to answer a specific question raised by the Department for Work and Pensions, rather than being included by default. When the DWP requested visual proof, the group adapted again. Investigators found evidence that photographs were digitally manipulated, showing people standing outside properties with front doors open to simulate proof of residence. These images were created using Photoshop, combining stock backgrounds with images of claimants or stand-ins. The fraud did not rely on documents alone. The group also coached claimants on how to deceive the system. Advice was given on what to say if contacted by the DWP, how to respond to verification questions, and when to stop communicating entirely and leave the claim in the gang's hands. Once guidance was provided, control of the application passed fully to the organizers. By the time the documents were submitted, each identity existed on paper as a complete, convincing life. And with thousands of these fabricated profiles circulating through the system at once, the fraud was able to scale without drawing immediate attention, until investigators began to see the patterns behind the paperwork. As the fraud continued, the proceeds were not quietly hidden. Instead, large amounts of money were converted into visible signs of wealth, which later became a crucial evidential trail for investigators. During property searches, police recovered designer watches, branded jackets, and luxury glasses, alongside bundles of cash stored in shopping bags, suitcases, and concealed inside furniture. These items were not incidental. Prosecutors later relied on them to demonstrate the scale of profit generated by the conspiracy. One of the most striking purchases was a luxury Audi A8, acquired using fraud proceeds. The vehicle itself was seized and later cited in court as evidence of how public money had been converted into personal assets. Social media activity further undermined any claim of ignorance or low-level involvement. Posts and videos showed spa breaks in Manchester, including overnight stays and treatments, as well as holidays to Turkey and Istanbul, often shared publicly. These trips coincided with periods when thousands of fraudulent claims were being processed. One seized mobile phone contained a video showing cash being thrown into the air, with £20 notes scattered across a flat floor. The footage was not symbolic. It was used in court to demonstrate both the volume of cash available and the attitude of those involved. Investigators also recovered WhatsApp group messages in which members openly mocked the naivety of the Department for Work and Pensions. Alongside the paperwork, officers seized more than 900 digital devices, including mobile phones, laptops, tablets, and storage media, which were later subjected to detailed forensic examination. The investigation itself unfolded gradually. Analysts within the DWP first identified unusual clustering of claims originating from the same small geographic area in North London, particularly around Wood Green. Multiple claims shared overlapping details that we have already covered. This pattern triggered a joint investigation between the Department for Work and Pensions, the Crown Prosecution Service, and the Metropolitan Police. A decisive breakthrough came from outside the UK. Bulgarian police in Sliven passed intelligence to British authorities, alerting them to the scale of the activity and the movement of money and identities between Bulgaria and the UK. Following his arrest and subsequent release under investigation, Gyunesh Ali fled the UK and returned to Bulgaria, attempting to avoid prosecution. His absence did not halt the case. UK authorities pursued extradition proceedings, and in February 2023, Ali was formally extradited back to the UK to face charges at Wood Green Crown Court. Investigators also established that Stoyan Stoyanov continued to submit fraudulent benefit claims even after the arrests, generating additional losses to the taxpayer while already under active investigation. This conduct was later relied upon in court as evidence of sustained criminal intent. By the time the case reached court, the volume of seized material, documents, devices, financial records, and communications allowed prosecutors to present a comprehensive picture of a coordinated industrial-scale fraud operation, setting the stage for guilty pleas and substantial prison sentences in the next phase of the case. With the arrests made and the evidence secured, the focus now shifted from how the fraud was carried out to how the money was spent, and how the group chose to live once the system started paying out. When the case reached sentencing, the full financial scale of the fraud was placed before the court. At Wood Green Crown Court, Judge David Arenberg KC made clear that this was not opportunistic offending, but a sustained, organized operation that treated Universal Credit as a reliable source of income. He described the fraud as industrial in scale, carried out with planning, discipline, and persistence over several years. During sentencing, the court also issued explicit deportation warnings, making clear that immigration action would follow custodial sentences for those without lawful status in the UK. Attention then turned to confiscation. Despite the headline figure of nearly £54 million, financial investigators told the court that only around £2 million could realistically be recovered. The rest, they said, had been withdrawn in cash, spent on luxury items, or moved beyond reach. Confiscation hearings resulted in orders reflecting what could be proven and traced, a fraction of the overall loss. Galina Nikolova was sentenced to 8 years imprisonment. Gyunesh Ali received a sentence of 7 years, and between 3 and 6 months, Stoyan Stoyanov was sentenced to 4 years imprisonment. Patricia Panova received 3 years and 2 months. Svetka Todorova was sentenced to 3 years, but was released on license due to time already served. What do you think about the cases and the sentences? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take. And if you found this breakdown informative, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next episode of UK crime documentaries.